introduce this young man to our audience. James Overmyer, currently of Tucson, Arizona, is a friend of mine for over 30 years. Jim is a baseball historian, researcher, and author with a focus on the Negro Leagues. He's a member since 1986 of the Society for American Baseball Research and serves on SABR's Negro League, 19th Century, Deadball, and Business of Baseball committees. Earlier, he served as a member of a group called the Negro League Researchers and Authors Group, which was awarded a $250,000 grant from Major League Baseball to study the Negro Leagues. Subsequently, he served on the 2006 Hall of Fame Committee on African American Baseball that inducted the Hall's largest group ever, 17 Negro League players and personages. Jim is here today to discuss his newest book, Cum Posey of the Homestead Grays. Welcome, Jim. Time is yours.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. We're now going to try to do the most difficult part of the entire morning, which is to get my screen share going here. Bear with me. It worked before. There's got to be a better way to do this, but we'll get there, folks. And lo and behold, here we are.
We can see it, Jim. All good.
All this stuff around it, yeah. Well. Yes. Well, it's the slides are colorful. I think it'll work out all right. So I was asked to come to talk to you about Cumberland Posey Jr., who Pittsburgh is just full of baseball history. It is particularly full of Black baseball history. And Mr. Posey is one of the preeminent people in that regard. He also bears we're going to talk about some about basketball too, because he is one of only two individuals who are in two American Professional Sports Halls of Fame. Because he was elected to the Baseball Hall in 2006 and the Basketball Hall of Fame in 2016. He was regarded as one of the best players in the 20s, and he was also using his very sharp managerial and development skills to make his Pittsburgh basketball team Black national champions for 4 straight years in the 20s. So that got him into the basketball hall also. He was born in Homestead, and this business of being the Homestead Grays is no accident. He was a Homestead resident his whole life. You can't, the business of, well, somebody took after their parents a lot and learned a lot, you know, that sometimes that's sort of not a real meaningful thing. However, in this case, I think it is. His parents were remarkable people, really sort of members of the Black upper class in the Pittsburgh area. And you can trace his most strongest traits. I was going to say his best. Some of them weren't exactly the best, but his strongest traits back to his parents. His mother, Anna Posey, had been a school teacher and founder of one of the founders of the Aurora Women's Reading Club in the early 1900s, which is, at least as of a couple of years ago, the last time I checked, was a group that is still in existence in Pittsburgh. She was a Black women's club leader, and she married C.W. Posey Sr., and you see him called here captain because he was a riverboat captain on the Ohio. And that was a big deal in those days when the railroads were still developing. A lot, the mills in Pittsburgh, the steel mills needed ore, they needed coal, and they needed them transported up and down the river there. And Posey was a deckhand on a boat. Then he got himself licensed as apparently the first Black chief engineer, they called it, which meant he was the captain, which is how he became forever after called Captain Posey. He then went into the boat building business, built 40 or so steamboats on the river, and then he wasn't done. He became an official and a partner in coal mines. So he owned or was a partner in businesses that would mine the coal, put it on the boats, transport it to Pittsburgh and Homestead. They call that, I believe, vertical integration in the economics books now. It's a very effective way to make money, and he did. He was, if you attach inflation figures to his salary, his recorded salary, he was probably making about $300,000 a year as a share of the nation's gross domestic product. The house there, that's the Posey Homestead on 320 13th Street. The house, unfortunately, does no longer exist. The Poseys actually own 3 houses. That one was in the middle. There's one to the left, which would be to the east, where Cumberland Jr. and his wife Ethel lived and raised their kids. And there's one to the right, which still exists, where the captain's oldest daughter, Beatrice, and her husband, as Evan Baker, lived. So Posey was an athlete all the time. He was a 3-sport athlete at Homestead High. He probably would have been a 4-sport athlete if they'd had a 4th sport to compete in. On the football team, on the basketball team, on the baseball team. And then starting in 1913, he started to play for the Homestead Grays, which were at that time an amateur or past the hat, maybe semi-professional team. He is the third from the left in the light colored cap in the second row. He played outfield, second base and outfield for them. And he was a decent player. I'll get to that some later. He was a decent player, not an outstanding player, but he sure knew how to run a ball team. And by the middle of the 19-teens, he was pretty much running the Homestead Grays. He had taken over management first as in partnership with others and then by himself. He booked the team around the Pittsburgh area, which is pretty much what they were confined to. But they grew. He had this great ability to play what you would call the long game. Like, he didn't try to overextend himself. He did what he set out to accomplish, what he thought could be accomplished, and then he would move up a step, and then he would move up a step. And it usually worked. Didn't always work, usually worked. By the 20s, the Homestead Grays were playing all over, not only the Pittsburgh area, all over Western Pennsylvania, also into West Virginia. They were a tri-state behemoth, really. And he was actually referred to in the Pittsburgh papers as in 1924 by Paul Adams, a columnist for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, as the McGraw of the Sandlots. And by the way, the Pittsburgh papers, Sandlots wasn't a denigrating term. They called everybody playing short of the Pirates really Sandlot ball, even if they were active semi-pros and one step below the minor leagues. They were called the Sandlots. So Posey was the McGraw of the Sandlots. The idea that the Grays would get up to schedules of 150 games, which they surpassed later, was pretty remarkable. And they had remarkable players too. And one of them, he started in the 20s, he started to gradually improve the team beyond the boundaries of Homestead. And he started to replace a lot of the locals with pros from elsewhere. And one of them is the Smokey Joe Williams, the Hall of Famer pitcher, who you see here. He was, Williams was pitching in New York, and they pretty much, the New York team he was playing for, the Lincoln Giants, pretty much thought he was at the end of the trail. Or should have been. He was like in his 20s or 40s rather by then. Posey signed him primarily to be like his captain or assistant manager. But Williams kept pitching and pitching and pitching. He lasted all the way into into the early 30s. He was pitching in his mid 40s, still pitching effectively, still pitching, not just reserved for the local semi-pro competition, but pitching against Black Major League competition too. And well, a slight digression here, Posey's illustrious hoop career, and it was. He started playing locally and played for and helped, needless to say, manage the Monticello Athletic Club. Those are the guys in the lower picture with the M's on their shirt. Posey is the second from the left in the first row. His brother Seward, who was also a high school and later a high school athlete and later a basketball player, is in the center of the second row. They got better and better. There were no black leagues at that time. But what national champions, and by nation in black basketball, was everywhere, everything between New York and Chicago, really nothing south of there, nothing west of there. But the best teams would self-select and they would challenge each other to games. Generally, you try to play a 3-game series. So if you came out with a 1-1 tie in a 2-game series on the year, there'd be questions about who was best. But if you played 3 games, there was no question who was best. They would line up these games all over the Eastern Seaboard and the Midwest, and the black sports writers would follow all these. At the end of the season, they would sort of decide in a consensus way of who the black champion was. In the 1912-13 season, it was the Monticellos. The Howard University team had been the real powerhouse, and the Monticellos took them on and beat them, and two games out of 2, I believe, that year, and became the champs. In the meantime, the upper picture is Posey and his sort of college career. He did go to Penn State in 1909 after high school and played on the varsity there. He's the first African-American athlete at Penn State. However, he did not finish there. It appears that he spent much more time on the basketball court and the baseball field than in the classroom. And if you read between the lines, it appears that he flunked out. So he came back to Pittsburgh. He took a shot at University of Pittsburgh, didn't stay there long, but he had an excellent career as a forward with the Duquesne team. Now, the only thing, and Duquesne acknowledges him as its first African-American varsity athlete. The registrar's office, and I talked to them, says, well, he may have been the first black college athlete at Duquesne, but he was never enrolled as a student. He was a ringer, in other words. This is not unusual in those days, and it was particularly not unusual at Duquesne, whose football team was known to pad itself out with local guys who never set foot in a classroom. So Posey, he had a cover. He called himself Charles Cumbert. That's him on the left of the second row behind the fellow in the sweater. Well, that wasn't much of a cover story. First of all, by then he was playing semi-pro basketball all over town. Everybody knew who he was. I guess the NCAA was in existence, but they didn't have the enforcement mechanisms that they have today. And I guess the local teams, the visiting teams didn't know who he was or didn't care. Maybe they had one of their own. But he played for them for 3 years, and then he quote unquote graduated because you couldn't hang around forever. He immediately formed the Lowendies. Now, the Lowendi is the name of a river in Central Africa, which Dr. Livingstone, I presume, history actually discovered. It was also the name of the preeminent Black Men's Club in Pittsburgh, and Captain Posey had been president for a few years. He put together this team, and the steady core of it were 3 local guys. One was Cumberland Posey, one was Bill Young, and one was Charles Greasy Betts, and they were always starters. And the other guys, again, they transitioned from filling out that lineup with local fellows, but pretty soon he's scouring the Eastern Seaboard for talent. Again, professional talent. It's a little under the radar, but by that point, it's not in fact, it's not under the radar at all, because the American Athletic Union department in Western Pennsylvania had already revoked the amateur status of the entire Monticello team because it was so obvious that they weren't amateurs. The Lowendies played that same routine, New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, all the best Black teams, and they were the consensus champs for 4 straight years, 1919-20 through 1922 and 23. They beat almost everybody. And some of those games were remarkable because basketball was in its early, there was one referee and he had to watch the ball. So all kinds of things. Posey had his jaw broken once away from the ball when another player on the other team slugged him. Things like that happen, not just to the Lowendies, but all over the place. But he gave up on basketball in the late 20s, excuse me. It really didn't pay, and his baseball team was really doing well. This is the 1931 Grays. I say best Negro League team ever. They are regarded as having been one of the best teams. That's whoever the best was is very subjective. The Grays had some other great teams. The Pittsfield Crawfords for a few years obviously had teams like Kansas City Monarchs had great teams. Doesn't really matter who was the best. I put this up here, I kind of talk about it in an extended way because this team shows a lot of what was happening with the Grays. This picture was taken in spring training in Hot Springs, Arkansas. Number one, they're not making enough money to actually go south for spring training. There's Posey on the left. The guy on the right in the suit is Charlie Walker, Posey's longtime friend and assistant. He was his assistant in running the team, as he was an assistant in running the Wendy's. If you looked at the official documents, Charlie Walker was the president. Posey was a team leader. He later became a leader in the executive councils of the Negro National League. He never wanted to be president. He wanted to be a little below the top, which didn't mean he didn't have control over things. In fact, he wrote a newspaper column. One of the things he picked up from mom, I think, was being literate and a good writer. He wrote a newspaper column for the Pittsburgh Courier for years. And more than once he would say, Walker got ill and dropped out and was replaced by Rufus Jackson as subsequent president. And Posey always said, well, Walker is the president or Jackson is the president, but Posey makes all the decisions. And that was true. So this team shows how the Grays are evolving. There are 14 players here, and only 4 of them have Pittsburgh connections. Second player from the left past Posey is Jasper Washington. Then Josh Gibson is the third from the right in the second row. Lefty Williams, a longtime Grays pitcher, is the second from the left in the first row. And smack in the middle is Vic Harris. They were the only ones of the 14 to have real Pittsburgh connections. However, on that team, there are 4 Hall of Famers. Gibson, Smokey Joe Williams, the tall guy in the center, you've seen him before. Oscar Charleston on the right, standing next to Charlie Walker. And where is he? Third from the right on the first row, Judd Wilson. 4 Hall of Famers. In addition, Vic Harris in the center there, and George Scales, second, standing between Gibson and Charleston, have been vote getters in Negro League Hall of Fame Negro League voting. So it's quite a team. He's scoured, he's replaced almost all of the Pittsburghers, including himself. He was the regular left fielder up until 1922. And one of the journeyman players he replaced was none other than himself, because he could find someone who could do better. He's playing the long game. Another thing about this team is 2 other things about this team. Jim Riley, who has done a lot of work on the Negro Leagues history, said in the 30s, there were, in terms of competitiveness, there were the 4 meanest guys in the league were Judd Wilson, Oscar Charleston, Vic Harris, and George Britt, who's in the first row on the left. And they all played for Posey at the same time. And the team was not disrupted. It was a fantastic team, which tells you what a hard-nosed, hard-fisted manager and owner Posey himself was. He'd get rid of players. It was interesting. He'd get rid of players, but he wouldn't slag them in public. He might say in his column that we're not satisfied with the Grays. There are going to be some changes. And occasionally he'd drop a mildly negative comment about a player, but he wouldn't really disrespect them. But next spring, they'd be gone. And he would have traded them, he would have released them, whatever. But if you weren't meeting his standards, you were out of there, and he could always get it. The Grays paid better than most Negro League teams. At that particular time, before Gus Greenlee came on the scene, maybe any Negro League team, Posey said, in so many words, I will go and take who I want. Oh, and by the way, the other teams are welcome to sign my players if they can meet their price. And they couldn't. So, yeah, so here's Charleston had 27 years as a player, although the last several was a playing manager, part-time player as a playing manager, Hall of Fame. 15 years as a manager. You got Vic Harris in the middle. 25 years as a player, a regular outfielder. Managed for 11 years, had the great good fortune, I guess you could say, to be the manager at Homestead Grays. He has 7 pennants and 1 World Series win to his credit. Would have had a couple more pennants and another World Series probably, except he dropped out during the war to work in the war industries and reduced himself to a part-time outfielder. And then when the war was over, he came right back and managed the team. There's Judd Wilson on the right. He had 2 stints with the Grays early on in 31 and 32. And then he came back during the war. The Grays, as so many teams did, lost players to the draft, or they lost players like Harris, who went to work in the war in defense industries and maybe would play part-time. And Posey, the ever active recruiter, went back and rolled back the clock, signed Wilson, who was in his 40s, signed Cool Papa Bell, who was in his 40s, signed Walter Rev Kennedy, not a Hall of Famer, but a solid regular player for, I don't know, 15 or 20 years, signed him in his 40s, and they all come back. And he came back and filled in gaps in the roster in the lineup for a few years. So Posey, he could really find talent, and he had the money to sign the talent. At least he had the money for a while. The Depression came along, and the Grays were on the skids. They depended on a lot of their income from playing the top semi-pro teams around Pittsburgh, most of which were sponsored by the steel mills or businesses that were related to the steel mills. Well, when manufacturing business went bad, one of the costs that got cut was the support of these teams. And so the Grays lost a lot of their economic base that way. Posey, you might think, well, the captain was rich. Well, we're not sure what happened to the captain's money, but the captain seems to have spent a lot of it. He also, Anna Posey died around 1920, and the captain remarried, and there was a prenuptial agreement that when he died in 1926, his second wife got a substantial portion of the estate. Not that there's anything wrong with that. She was his wife. Beatrice, the daughter, and her husband, the first Evan Baker, made out great because their inheritance was Posey forgiving the mortgage on their house. So they got a free house out of the deal. Cumberland and Seward got some money, but not the kind of money you would need to support your baseball team in hard times. The Grays were in tough shape. Meanwhile, the numbers king, the numbers gambling banker king of Pittsburgh, Gus Greenlee, who was a big sports backer. That's his light heavyweight champion, John Henry Lewis, and the poster behind him. He had a stable of fighters. He was in the entertainment business. He's standing in his famous Pittsburgh restaurant, the Crawford Grill, and he got interested in baseball. There was this local boys team called the Pittsburgh Crawfords, and they were really, really good young players. And he backed the team. And then he took over the team, and he turned them into a professional team. And he got rid of most of the local players and signed a lot of pros. He did the Posey thing because he had, relatively speaking, tons of money. He did the thing Posey had done in 20 years, Gus did in about 4, because he could afford to. And by 34 or so, who were some of his best players? A lot of the guys you saw about 2 slides ago, Crawford, Charleston was with him, Vic Harris was with him. Posey was on the skids. He couldn't afford to pay his players, and they left. I mean, this is all, the Grays were an independent team. Posey held them out of leagues because he made more money playing top semi-pros in the tri-state area than he would make being a league team. So he held them out. He lost a lot of them. The Grays plummeted for a while, but Posey, as Greenlee had taken all of these pages out of Posey's playbook, Posey took the big page out of Greenlee's playbook. He partnered with a new partner, Rufus Sunnyman Jackson, who was the numbers king of Homestead and had not as much disposable income as Gus, but enough. And they built the Grays back up slowly over a few years. Got some of their guys back. Harris came back. He was a key guy because of his managerial qualities, in addition to the fact you could put him in left field every day and feel really good about it. So Posey started to build his roster up again. Greenlee had so much money, he built his own ball field, Greenlee Field, which was on Bedford Avenue up on the hill there in Pittsburgh. But Gus's empire collapsed. Two things happened to him. 1937, Rafael Trujillo, the dictator of the Dominican Republic, decided he wanted the best team in the Dominican League. And if you thought Gus Greenlee could pay per players, you hadn't seen anything yet. He enticed 10 players away from Negro National League rosters. He picked up a bunch of others, Latin American players who'd been playing for the Cuban Stars. That team went out of business and they were free agents. So he scooped them. He scooped 10 guys off the rosters, most of them from Greenlee, including Satchel Paige and James Bell. And they spent the summer in sunny Santo Domingo, beating everybody, and Greenlee's team collapsed. And he didn't have the money to build it up. The numbers business was under attack by generally Pittsburgh government and police officials sort of just waved their hand at that sort of thing. But there was a crackdown and Greenlee suffered in the crackdown. So when he needed the money the most to get back into baseball, he didn't have it. By 38, the Crawfords were down in the standings. By 39, they were history. He sold the franchise and went back to his other things. Greenlee and Posey were on, as far as baseball management, they were bitter opponents. Who owns Pittsburgh? Well, only one team could really own Pittsburgh. Turned out to be the Homestead Grays. And years later, Greenlee had a guy working for him named John Clark, who was a journalist in Pittsburgh, a journalist and PR guy. And he had actually been a boyhood friend of Posey's. But he took Greenlee's side during the baseball war and wrote, he and Posey traded these battleship salvos of critical articles in the Pittsburgh Courier all the time. But it passed and they became friends again. And they're riding around in the early 40s in a car on some kind of mission. And he started talking about the old days. And Posey said to Clark, I always knew I would win because Gus never really understood the business of baseball. This is the Cumberland Posey high self-esteem phrase, the best one. As the team rebuilds, he's got lots of good players. I picked these two because they're two of the Hall of Famers. There's something like a dozen Hall of Famers that played for the Grays at one point or another. I think maybe 14, although some of them passed through very briefly. But these guys didn't. Josh Gibson was, of course, I think of him mostly as a Gray. Of course, he went to the Crawfords and had some excellent years there. But those are the only two teams, other than times in south of the border, a few years, he played in Pittsburgh. He was the star of Pittsburgh. And his battery mate many times was the guy running to home plate there, Ray Brown, a native of Ohio who's pitched for the Grays from 32 to 45. And he was a good hitter too. He's rounding third and headed home after a home run here. He played outfield a lot of the time when he wasn't pitching. And he also had the distinction of being Cum Posey's son-in-law. One of the things the Poseys did with their three-house compound there was to board some of the players during the summer. And Brown stayed in one of the houses, and lo and behold, he and Ethel Posey, Cumberland's oldest daughter, got married. These are the Grays when they were back on their feet, 9 straight pennants. Some people think some people say they did not win in 1939. Well, they finished in first place. You can see they won 2/3 of their games against Major League Black opponents. That year, the Negro World Series had not come back into existence yet. The Negro American League was only a couple years old, and they hadn't worked out the resumption of the World Series that had been played in the 20s. So the league decided to have what they called a Shaughnessy playoff. The first 4 teams would play each other, first against third, second against fourth. The 2 winners would play a 3-game series for the championship. And the Baltimore Elite Giants, who were in third place in the regular season, beat the Grays in 39 and took the trophy. All I can say is I'm writing a book about the Grays. As far as I'm concerned, they won in 39. They got the best season record. But it's pretty remarkable. 2 World Series out of 4 tries once that got going. Never had a 1-loss percentage. Well, I was going to say below 650. There's one at 649. Well, there's one at 624. It's all pretty remarkable. Now, get away from sports. Posey was very active. Again, I think picking up on his mother. He was elected in 1931 as the first African-American member of the Homestead School Board. And since he got in the Hall of Fame, families have been exhuming their parents' or grandparents' diplomas that were signed by the school board when Posey was a member. This one fetched about $2,000 at an auction site. I don't know who Mr. Depot was, but somebody in his family made a few bucks for free, essentially. Posey is a signee in the lower, signor in the lower left-hand column. And that was just one of the things he did for the community. He was very active promoting the African-American community, which by then it was pretty sizable. You know, they worked in the mills. They were an important part of the workforce. Homestead, I wouldn't say that Homestead was not a de facto segregated borough. I'm not gonna, that's it. I'm sure it was. But the schools were not segregated, unlike in Pittsburgh for a long time. And Posey could go anywhere. He became a favorite of the local Republican committee, the Republican machine in the 30s. They really owned the town. He had this great thing. He had this relationship. He was a sports guy, so he had a relationship with all these people who worked in the mills. But I mean, if you know the geography of Homestead, the whole town rises up from the river to the south, a steep hill to get to the top. And the higher up the hill you are, the more rarefied your neighborhood is. Well, I think there are something like 20 or 21 cross streets, and the Poseys lived on 13th. So pretty good. So he's also relatable to the white middle class and the little bit black middle class. So he gets elected, but he leaves the party on 34. There was a sort of a revolution. The Republican machine run by a guy named John Kavanaugh, who was the borough Burgess, the mayor for the longest time, got pretty corrupt. And his leading lieutenant, a guy named John McLean, who had been a boyhood friend of Posey's and had played with him at Duquesne. McLean apparently actually went to the school. Broke with Kavanaugh, jumped to the Democratic Party. Of course, this is during FDR's time. There were a lot of defections from the Republicans to the Democrats. And Posey went with him, and a lot of people went with him. And so Posey, when he runs for re-election in 35, he runs as a Democrat, and he wins again. He served until he died on the school board in 1946. McLean beats Kavanaugh and becomes the borough mayor. And so Posey is still in with the power structure. He doesn't appear to have gotten much of anything else out of it. He did what he did. I mean, he was a busy guy. He was running his baseball team. He was active in the black branch of the Elks and everything else. So, but he became very opposed to the Republicans, and he didn't, as being Posey, he didn't make any bones about it. In 1938, the grandson of one of his friends, also a McLean, also a guy who'd switched from Kavanaugh to McLean, got arrested. There was an assault. A white girl told the police that one night a black guy crept in her second-story window and tried to assault her, and this apparently happened. She was led to identify her assailant as a guy named James Chapman, who was the grandson of Abe Dorsey, a friend of Posey's, a friend of a lot of people, a friend of the Democratic Party. And Chapman got arrested. I mean, he was headed to jail, prison. Posey went to bat for him. This is his sports column, and he never, ever wrote about anything but sports, except this once. He starts out his column. This writer was a character witness for a boy in Homestead the past week. The charges against the boy was of a very serious nature, etc. And farther down in the column, he relates the whole story. The case was before a judge named Michael Musmano, who later became a Pennsylvania Supreme Court judge, a very liberal Democrat who had broken again, another guy who had left the Republican Party. And Musmano, the case stunk. I mean, the girl later recanted her identification, didn't say the crime didn't happen, but she recanted her identification of Chapman. It was very clear that the corrupt police department had forced her into this. Musmano basically instructed the jury in so many words, as judges can do, they don't usually, to come back with a not guilty verdict. And they went out and they sat down for a little while and they came back with a not guilty verdict. Farther down in his column, Posey says about the charge, this, ladies and gentlemen, is a white woman accused a colored man of assault. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the same as tying a man to a tree and as illegal lynching. And he had the greatest things to say about Musmano for basically bringing about the acquittal of the guy. Posey got arrested twice, mostly for being not a Kavanaugh guy. He wrote a letter to the Homestead Messenger, the local paper, We're running out of time. I'm having a great time. You're running out of time. We got to move along here, folks. All right, this is these are the National League officers in the 1940s, a group picture of them in a meeting. Posey's in a very unusual position here, third from the right, which is to say there are people overwhelming him. He's hidden behind the left elbow of Ed Bolden of Philadelphia and Tom Wilson, the league president, also owner of the Eli Giants. But Posey was always an officer of this, again, never wanted to be president, secretary, treasurer, a leading member of the gang. And this is probably, I don't know, perhaps his most brilliant management move. He had a deal with the Pittsburgh Pirates. The Grays played a lot of their games in Forbes Field. And attendance was good, but it could be better. And so in 1940, he cut a deal with Clark Griffith, the owner of the Washington Senators, and they started playing games in Griffith Stadium in Washington. And Washington had a large Washington's black population grew 40% between 1930 and 1940. And lots of fans, lots of money to be made. They were playing almost 26 dates and almost 38 games there by 1943. It was really their home park. They never forsook their roots, but it was really their home park. These are the Grays in the middle, and the best major league team in DC. They really were. The Senators were terrible. The Senators in 1942, for example, finished in 7th place and had averaged 6,700 people per game. The Grays, of course, won the pennant. Their attendance usually exceeded 10,000 when they played there. They drew 125,000 fans that year. I mean, Clark Griffith would have been jealous, except of course they were paying 20% of the gross gate to the Senators as rent. So I'm sure he had no problem. This is the Grays Brain Trust. On the left is Seward Posey, Posey's older brother, who was administrator for them and their scout. In the middle is Rufus Jackson, the numbers guy who he did have a real interest in baseball. He was the president, and he and Posey, Cumberland, worked a lot. The guy on the right is a local Washington, D.C. Elks official. This was an Elks night. Posey's wearing his fez. He, at that time, was the national sports director for the black branch of the Brotherhood of Elks. Soon he was ill. His daughter Beatrice told me when I interviewed her that he didn't feel well for a few years, but whatever it was misdiagnosed, and by 1945, he had figured out, unfortunately, that he had lung cancer. He hung in there. He was still going. He died in March of 46. He died in March of 46. He was still going to the last National League winter meeting in February in New York City in February of 46, although he spent most of his time in the hotel room, and Rufus Jackson went down and did the negotiating and the talking and the voting. He died on March 28th in 46 in Mercy Hospital. The night before, he persuaded them to let him out, and his friends put him in a car and drove him to Homestead, and he toured his town for the last time. He came back, he died. Wendell Smith, the Hall of Fame writer, was writing for the Courier at the time. He took off on a column that Grantland Rice had written in 1910 about the dying of an athlete. He called it Game Called. There'll be no cheering in the stands today. The captain of the team has passed away. There was Posey's had his funeral in Homestead. The actual and honorary pallbearers were 31 of them. Baseball figures, Gus Greenlee was there. Art Rooney, a longtime friend of his, the president, the owner of the Pittsburgh Steelers, was there. Gibson was there. Bill Young from the basketball days was there. You have to wonder, in closing, you have to wonder, baseball integration was on the cusp of happening. The black owners pretty much got shut out of the integration process. The players crossed over, the owners did not, with a very few exceptions. Posey was so well connected and so skilled that you have to wonder if he could not have crossed over and led an executive invasion or whatever into white baseball. The only thing is, I don't know if Cumberland Posey could ever have brought himself to work for somebody else. He was such a strong-willed guy. But if he could have been the guy we point to as the fellow who integrated the front offices of Major League Baseball, but we'll never know. So that is it. I guess there might be questions. I hope I haven't run over too much, but I do love talking about this.
Jim, many thanks. You've got the first team of webinar attendees for the Gibson Foundation today, and you've got some good questions already in the Q&A and chat. Let me raise a couple with you. First is from Nick, and Nick is asking, do you know the origin of the team name Grays, and did Posey come up with the name?
He did not come up with the name. The team existed when he joined it. As far as I know, it probably pertained to the color of their stockings. A lot of teams, the Red Sox became the Red Sox because of their stockings. The White Sox became, well, they were the White Stockings and then the White Sox. The Providence team in the National League, the White National League in the 1800s were the Gray Stockings. I asked John Thorne, a Major League historian, about this, in fact, about this very thing. He says, probably the color of their stockings. That was a common way to identify teams in those days. Sounds strange, but.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Gary, very good question. Thanks, Gary, for that. In writing the Posey bio, did you have access to the financial records for the Grays? And he also said, thanks for your great presentation and work on Effa Manley.
I did not, because they don't appear to have existed anymore. You don't find many team records around. The Newark Eagles records were miraculously preserved, and they had a lot of financial stuff in them. Posey would write in his columns. You'd get a hint of how things went. The leagues had a good year, or there'd be some other reporter would say, hey, this happened when they were in Washington. Art Carter of the Baltimore African American said, Grays made $100,000 last year, which sounds like a lot, but it could be true. They made a lot of money in Washington. And where would he have gotten that? But I mean, Posey would have slipped it to him, I suppose. You sort of have to go, well, we did well, or we didn't do very well, or the league didn't do very well. And you sort of have to pierce the veil a little at a remove, unfortunately.
Thank you. Let me throw a question in as well. I'm curious about Posey's relationship with the owners of the Pittsburgh Pirates.
He had a good relationship with the Dreyfus family. He rented the field from them, the park from them. Got along with them well. There really wasn't anything else that could be done, although After Barney Dreyfus passed away, his son-in-law, Bill Benswanger, became the president. And he became a target of, in the late 30s, of Black sports writers who wanted integration, and they would push him, say, your team is not doing well. And gosh, here's Josh Gibson, here's Ray Brown, and Benswanger would not ignore them, and he'd say, that's a good idea, maybe we should do that, and then he would never do it. So there was a relationship, a good relationship with the Dreyfus family. He had a good relationship with Griffith. That's why I think Posey might have been the executive to cross over. He really got along with all of these people. They had professional things in common.
Thank you. Ted, we handled the 2 questions in the Q&A, and then I have thrown one in as well. Do you have a question before we turn it back over to Sean? You're on mute, sir.
There you go.
I think I'm good now. I apparently got kicked offline. I guess Sean must have been upset with me. But I did have a couple questions, and I didn't hear your question, Tom. Was that about the Pirates' relationship with the Grays? Okay. I wanted to know about Gus Greenlee away from the baseball field. You did say, Jim, that he attended the funeral. Was there any kind of cordial relationship at all between the two?
When they weren't fighting tooth and nail over the turf in Pittsburgh, they seem to have gotten along pretty well. I don't think there was any pre-30s relationship in particular, although, as I say, Clark's #1 administrative guy, Greenlee's #1 administrative guy, John Clark, was an old friend of Posey's. But they didn't hate each other. And when it was all over, Clark wrote once later that after Greenlee dropped out of the league, the other owners basically ignored him. He said, except for Cumberland Posey. Whenever he came to Pittsburgh, he would drop in at the Crawford Grill and say hi to Gus Greenlee, who after they were at each other's throat for 5 years. But after that, hey, it's, we're not fighting anymore. We have nothing to fight over anymore, so we're not fighting anymore.
Well, thanks for that, Jim. That was great.
Okay.
Does Gus Greenlee, and you voted in 2006 for those 17 inductees. You didn't get a chance to vote for Greenlee because he wasn't even on that ballot.
He wasn't on a ballot.
Does he belong in the hall?
I have a little bit of a yes and no. I have a little bit of a bias against short careers, like the players or whatever. And Gus was really only at the top of his game for about 5 years. On the other hand, he brought the Crawfords up in a 80 mile an hour hurry from a local team to the best team in the Negro National League. He helped found the East-West All-Star Game in 1933. Yeah, his career was short, but it was probably the most productive short career you'll ever see, at least off the actual diamond. So yes, he's if the hall ever gets around to admitting Negro League people again, and I don't know if they will, but yeah, he's a candidate in his own distinctive way.
Okay, and not to belabor my favorite subject, George Scales, you mentioned him. I think he belongs. Is there any others that, not necessarily Grays, that you think belong?
Oh, so this is like a give me question. Well, Rap Dixon would be one. I guess I can think of.
Wasn't
Yeah,
asking
Rap
for
Dixon
that.
belongs in. I think Scales would be a great addition. I think Greenlee would be a great addition. Turning back to owners, Ed Bolden, who was he was a very laid back guy. He built and proceeded like Posey without in Philadelphia without all of the to do. But Bolden would be a good candidate as far as other players. Well, I think I know he's a Gray. Well, I think Vic Harris should be in as a manager. Um, yeah, there are others. Will that opportunity arise? I certainly hope so. I don't know. The Hall has drifted away from the 19th century players, which doesn't bother me much. I mean, they have had a lot of opportunities, and they've drifted away from the Black players, and that bothers me a lot.
Well, thank you, Jim, and thanks, Ted, for your thoughts on other things we should pose to Jim. We got you. We need to really mine your wonderful memory and perspective. So this has been great for us today. I know Sean has had to step away. I would simply end with an infomercial that all of us on the call are already mindful of. The Josh Gibson Foundation is a significant player in the city of Pittsburgh to serve the needs of young people. And its campaigns and commitments continue. Among its initiatives in the coming years are its grave marker initiative. There are upwards of 30 or more Negro Leaguers in unmarked graves in Pittsburgh area cemeteries. And the foundation is taking that on as a major initiative to address. I think one of them is actually Cumberland Posey's brother that has an unmarked grave. There are a number of folks who really need better acknowledgement and attention. The foundation will lead the way on that, and its commitment to having an academy for young in the McKees Rocks area is now gaining traction. We really anticipate the foundation playing a major role in continuing to serve those in the Pittsburgh community. We thank you for this because this allows us to shine a light on that. And we thank you, Jim. You end and culminate year 2 of our webinar series. We're going to continue it next year. So stay tuned there. Sean, I'll give you the last word since you're back from speaking with the students.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm trying to do 5 things at once. But again, I don't know what Tom said, but again, just thank everybody for joining us. Jim, thank you. Great presentation. And as always, we'll have a list going out for 2023, our webinar series part 3. Hope you can join us for next year. With that being said, we'll wish everybody a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And we'll see everyone in 2023. Thank you.
Thank you. Been a pleasure.
Jim, stay on.
Okay.
John, I have Jim's address and t-shirt size. I'll send that to you offline.
A few more people to log out.
Sure.
I think that's it. So I'm gonna stop the recording.